Your trademark is stupidity.
Before we begin this trial, I want to make one thing very clear. The law does not recognize the existence of ghosts. I don't believe in them either. So I don't want to hear a lot of malarkey about goblins, spooks, and demons. We're going to stick to the facts in this case. Leave the ghost stories to the kiddies, understood? All right, let's get on with it. Peter Venkman, Raymond Stans, Egon Spengler, stand up! Get up!
You too, Mr. Tully.
Find you guilty on all charges. Order you to pay fines in the amount of $25,000 each. I sent you to 18 months in the city correctional facility at Rikers Island.
Edie, she's twitching.
I'm not finished! On a more personal note, let me just go on record as saying that there's no place for fake charlatans.
Your Honor?
Shut up! Tricksters like you in decent society.
Your Honor, this is important.
You play on the gullibility of innocent people.
Yes, sir.
Be quiet.
But
my hands are tied by the unalterable fetters of the law, and I would invoke the tradition of our illustrious forebears. Reach back to a purer, sterner justice, and have you burned at the stake!
Is Judge Wexler here a good example of how a judge in the American legal system should act? Judges are not only important governmental functionaries, but also familiar pop cultural symbols. They are supposed to symbolize the vaunted rule of law as a system in which officials can resolve disputes and end controversies fairly, without bias, by referring to a neutral, accessible body of laws. However, since the 1970s, more and more pop cultural judges on film and television have portrayed more like Judge Wexler here. These pop cultural depictions of judges have been classified as the hanging judge. But what exactly does a hanging judge mean? Well, today we're going to examine the true life origins of the hanging judge, how they evolved into pop culture, and see examples of different types of hanging judges that emerged in the 20th century. So if you're ready, come along.
two in the box.
Ready to go.
We be fast and
They be slow.
You made it. Brilliant. So what exactly does the term hanging judge mean? Well, let's just get the screen up here. Wonderful. Black's Law Dictionary defines the term hanging judge as a slang for a judge who is harsh, and sometimes corruptly so, with defendants, especially those accused of capital crimes. However, there are other definitions for the term hanging judge. The website tvtropes.org provides us with another definition, of course. This one is more attuned to pop culture. TV Tropes itself is a website dedicated to archiving pop culture archetypes that frequently appear in all manner of media. Let's take a look how TV Tropes defines hanging judge. A hanging judge is a ruthless judge who rules his courtroom with an iron fist as his own personal fiefdom. He will hand out brutal sentences for the most minor of infractions. He may be corrupt in using the law for his own ends. A corrupt hick using the power to dominate the local community. A Knight Templar who believes punishments are justified. Or a bully who gets off on abusing his power. But any hero who goes up against him, expect no mercy and precious little justice. This definition of a hanging judge appears in a plethora of films. However, the hanging judge is not a creation of the media. It has its origins in the pages of history. The American West seemed like a breeding ground for hanging judges in the 19th century, but none were better known than Judge Roy Bean and Judge Isaac Parker. Bean was born in 1825 and spent most of his life as an outlaw, narrowly escaping the noose. In 1882, he arrived in Vinegaroon, Texas, just west of the Pecos River. It was commonly said at the time, west of the Pecos there is no law, and west of El Paso there is no God. On August 2nd, 1882, Bean was appointed judge by the Pecos County Commissioners. He was an eccentric and original interpreter of the law. When a Chinese rail worker was murdered, Bean ruled that his law book didn't make it illegal to kill a Chinese. Oh, this may sound horrible. However, the killer's friends were present at the trial and prepared to ride. Another time a man carrying $40 in a pistol fell off a bridge. Bean fined the corpse $40 for carrying a concealed weapons, thereby paying for the funeral expenses. However, though he ruled his courtroom with an iron fist and treated it like his own personal fiefdom, there was no evidence that he actually hanged anyone. 2 feature films have made about fictionalized depictions of Roy Bean, including The Westerner and The Life and Times of Roy Bean. But we'll get to that one later. Now, Judge Isaac Parker didn't shy away from hanging the convicted. President Theodore Roosevelt's Attorney General Phil Landernach said, "Judge Parker tried and sentenced to death more murderers than any judge who ever sat within the limits of the United States." By the time he retired, the U.S. Supreme Court had reviewed 44 of his sentence and reversed 31. Parker once said, "I never hanged a man, it's the law." But by the time he died, he had earned the nickname the Hanging Judge and was already a pop culture figure. This has endured for 115 years since his death. He was depicted in the 1969 film True Grit, played by James Westerfield, and its 2010 remake, played by John McIntyre. These 2 examples made names for themselves as hanging judges within their lifetime. But what really brought the hanging judge into the awareness of pop culture was the cinema. Judges in the 1950s and 60s were simple, dull, and trivial characters. They seldom interacted with the main characters in any meaningful way, or altered the central course of events. Judges like this can be found in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Will the defendant please rise and face the jury?
And Anatomy of a Murder.
Mr. Beegler, you finally got your rape into the case.
However, the portrayal of the judges was about to change when we entered the 1970s. There was a crisis of confidence regarding the legal system in the 1970s. The National Center for State Courts carried out a survey of attitudes toward courts and justice. Of people they polled, only 23% expressed a high degree of confidence in the state and local courts. 38% were somewhat confident, and 37% were slightly confident or not confident at all. Concurrent with this shift in attitude, the hanging judge became more prominent in film and pop culture. As more judges became depicted as hanging judges, not all were portrayed as corrupt, villainous judge like Judge Westler from Ghostbusters 2. In the 1970s, filmmakers began to try many new ways to depict judges, hoping that one or more of these would strike gold. Thus, a variety of judges evolved into pop culture. Being a hanging judge does not automatically make you a villain. A hanging judge can use his unorthodox style and courtroom demeanor to aid the protagonist by granting outlandish scheme to prove the innocence, or giving the antagonist a taste of his own medicine. A good example is in Used Cars. Used Cars is a 1980 film starring Kurt Russell as Rudy Russo and Jack Warden as the twins Roy and Luke Fox. After Roy dies, Rudy runs the used car lot against Roy's former competitor Luke. Eventually, Roy's daughter, played by Deborah Harmon, inherits the lot and tries to compete with Luke. Luke uses a video editor to make it appear that Barbara has made claims of false advertising on television commercial, saying she had a mile of cars, and she ends up being taken to court.
Goddamn Sam, what the hell you mean you got hanging Judge Harrison? He's not on a take, he's legit.
Roy, you remember that colored kid found guilty for stealing a case of beer?
Billy Joe Washington?
Yeah. Well, hanging Judge Harrison gave him 35 years hard labor. Now look, you need someone who's gonna throw the book at this broad. I've paid off all the witnesses, all the experts. I even have her attorney on my payroll.
The judge in the case is Hangham H. Harrison, played by Grandpa Al Lewis.
This court is now in session.
As the prosecutor begins his question, Barbara Harrison twirls and polishes a pair of handcuffs. Adorning his bench are models of a guillotine, electric chair, and even a gallows, to which he demonstrates his function for Barbara.
Miss Felix.
Huh?
Are you absolutely certain that you understood the gentleman's question?
Harrison demonstrates his unorthodox style by deciding to physically move the proceedings to the car lot to measure every car to see if they do indeed have a mile of cars. This allows Rudy to pull a stunt to get a mile of cars in the nick of time. Harrison sides with the protagonist and dismisses the case. When the villainous Luke begins to complain, Harrison responds,
Oh, give me that shit. Come on.
Look, for uttering those contemptuous remarks in my presence, I'm gonna put your balls in a sling. Deputies, let's haul ass.
Though his style is very unorthodox, Harrison shows that it's not a requirement for the hanging judge to be the villain of the story. These things are dangerous. One of the distinguishing features of a hanging judge is they are not always tied to the courtroom. Sometimes a hanging judge must go out into the public and personally dispense his brand of justice. In these cases, the judge becomes less the wise finder of fact, but more of an action hero. The Life and Times of Roy Bean, starring Paul Newman as the titular Roy Bean, is a 1972 highly fictionalized version of Judge Roy Bean's life. The opening text informs the audience this is not what actually happened, this is what should have happened. The film version of Bean starts by wandering into an isolated, dusty whorehouse after just robbing a bank. There he is mugged and almost hung by the patrons and employees. Bean responds by going back and single-handedly killing everyone inside in a firefight. He happens to find a book of Texas state statutes lying on the bar. This inspires him to simply declare himself judge. Bean sets up a bar as his courtroom and recruits 5 failed outlaws as his marshals. Bean sends his marshals out to capture outlaws, and Bean judges them. The vast majority end up hung. Any money the outlaws had on them is confiscated, and what Bean declares fine and used to build a fully functional town. After his companion dies as a result of childbirth, Bean leaves the town. Without him, the town becomes corrupt, and crime runs amok under the evil lawyer Mayor. When they try to foreclose on Bean's saloon, which his now adult daughter has inherited, Bean returns. The film climaxes in a shootout where Bean, nearly single-handedly, shoots the entire army of bad guys, burns down all the other buildings built by the mayor, and sacrifices himself
For Texas and Miss Lily!
Pop culture in the 1970s has a clear influence on how Bean was rendered in this film. Bean, who was in reality never hanged anybody, now has a body count of hundreds if not thousands. Film critic Pauline Kael wrote, Roy Bean goes way beyond being Dirty Harry on the range, because there is no rational order to keep in Roy Bean's world. While he may be the example of the hanging judge man of action, Roy Bean was definitely not the last.